Hey mama, do you find yourself wishing you knew you were on the right path with your business? Or wanting to know how to do it all as a work-at-home mom and entrepreneur? If you struggle with imposter syndrome, mom guilt, or fear of failure, then you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Alexia, a Christian mindset coach passionate about teaching moms how to renew their minds to find success both in business and motherhood. You can overcome the negative thoughts holding you back from fully stepping into your calling. I know what it's like to worry your business will never work, to feel mom guilt every time you work on your business, to realize your mindset is hindering you, but not knowing how to change it in a Christ-centered way. I created the Mama with a Calling podcast to teach you how to use the powerful combination of God's Word and proven mindset strategies to help you break free from negative, paralyzing thoughts and gain clarity and confidence to go where God is leading you. As you step out of the old way of thinking and into God's way, you'll find more peace, joy, and purpose. Pop in those earbuds and get ready to let God work in you so He can work through you. Hi there, and welcome back to another episode. Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how you should expect your business to be challenging. Not your business, how you should expect the journey as you're growing a business to be challenging. And this is something that I've heard a lot from clients, and that is that if God called them to do it, then it shouldn't be hard, right? Like that's a thought. And I don't know where this comes from, but it is definitely prevalent. I know that I thought the same thing, but that just isn't true. So there seems to be this underlying expectation that if you're on the right path, like the way that you know, like, yes, I'm doing what God has called me to do, is that the path is going to be easy, that the whole way is just going to be it's just going to be cupcakes and rainbows, as I say. But this isn't, and if that's not true, right? If you think that's true, then when you face a challenge, when things are hard, when something either outside of you, like circumstantial, comes up, or maybe you have a mental challenge, like there's a mindset challenge, there's something that you struggle with. When you face those things and it makes having your business hard, then you might say, oh, I'm not on the right path. But that is not necessarily true. So I want to talk about this because I think this is really important. So I want to share why I think this is that if something is hard, if something is challenging, that it's probably not the case that you're on the wrong path. And I say probably not because it's true that sometimes the path is full of resistance because you're not supposed to be going that way, right? Like there's bad things happening. It's just not working out, whatever. And the example of this that I like to talk about is in Acts when Paul is trying to go into Asia, and it says, "But the Spirit of the Lord would not let him go." And I think that's because by not let him, I think it's that nobody was responding to the gospel, like it wasn't working. But that's different than things are challenging, things are hard, because as we know, Paul faced a ton of hardship. Things were constantly challenged. He was constantly getting persecuted and in prison and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't mean he wasn't where he needed to be. For example, at the end of 1 Corinthians in 16:9, Paul says, there is a wide open door. Like God has opened the door for me to do work here, although many oppose me. So it's not about not having opposition or challenges, etc. So I want to help you reframe the hard things that come with starting a business, building a business, learning how to be an entrepreneur, quitting your job, making those decisions to follow God. And I want to do this by having you ask the question, what if the hard things are part of the journey to develop your character to where God is leading you? So in James 1:2-4, you're probably familiar with this verse. It says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." So this points to the idea that trials and hard things can be used to build up our faith and our character. Now, he's referring to like being a Christian was being challenged and persecuted, but this also holds true just for anything that we're doing with our faith. Right? Like you starting a business, you stepping out and saying yes, you quitting one career and starting this one. Those are all big acts of faith because they're hard, right? They take a lot of belief that God has called you to this in order to do that. So it doesn't discount that this applies to those as well. In 2 Corinthians 12:7-10, Paul talks about the thorn in the flesh. So it says, So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, and this is Jesus, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so then Paul's response is, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with my weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, what's really interesting, and my pastor was talking about this last week at church, that God sent the thorn to humble Paul as a gift. Because Paul says, like, the thorn was given to me. It was this, this grace, this gift. But because if you look at the Greek, the word for give or was like given to me it's from God. And so we ask, like, why would God do that? And I personally think there has been so much speculation over what the thorn in the flesh could be. And I don't understand why, but a lot of people think that the thorn in the flesh is something physical. But to me, it's pretty obvious that it's mental, because it says a messenger of Satan to harass me. So I feel like, to me, it makes a lot of sense that the thorn in the flesh is pride. Because think about who Paul was. He was a Pharisee. Pharisees are very prideful, right? So to me, it's that Paul was struggling with constantly lifting himself up, because he says it's this messenger of Satan, not an actual pain, but thoughts that continue to torment him. He knew pride was a sin. Pride is one of the biggest sins, that God talks about. He knew that. He knew the law. So knowing that he constantly is like prideful, it wasn't just, oh, I need to stop, thinking so highly of myself. Like, he knew that pride was a sin. And so, because in the Old Testament, which is the book the law he knew, God goes against the prideful, but he's for the humble. So Paul has to keep resisting that pride. Because if you think about, like, he's literally going around and telling people this amazing connection between the Old Testament and the New, and what Jesus did, and how, and then he's being this example for everybody he encounters. Like, that's what he's decided to do. He is going to live up to what God has called him to do and who Jesus calls us to be, so that he can be this example for others. That would be really hard to not think, look how awesome I am. Everybody needs to be like me, And so he has to keep resisting this pride, and all the things that happen to him, suffering, insults, etc., are constantly humbling him. So they are challenging him to not want to boast and defend himself, because every time he gets insulted, he could say something like, don't you know who I am? Or, he gets persecuted or whatever. It's like, I am Paul. I do this and I do that, like all of this stuff. And in this passage of 2 Corinthians, he is kind of defending himself, and he actually kind of comes back and says, I didn't want to do that. Like, I didn't want to do that. But they were saying basically he didn't count as an apostle, because he wasn't like this super apostle of the 12 that were with Jesus. And he's like, that is not how he works. And I have just as much right, because God called me to this and got to, all this. And so in those moments, he is going to have to lean on Jesus to not boast. To not defend himself, to not be prideful. So, because Jesus said his grace is sufficient for him, for his power is perfected in weakness. So Paul says that when he is weak, he is strong. So when he is facing moments that he feels like he wants to boast and pride is right there at the door, he knows that he is weak. He is weak in that moment. His flesh wants to wants to be prideful. But in that moment, Jesus is strong, because Paul knows that he is weak in this area. And the only thing that he can do to not succumb to that pride is to have Jesus come through, to have the Holy Spirit take over, because Jesus strengthens him in those moments. So now Paul's saying he welcomes all weaknesses, insults, etc., because he knows that every time he feels weak in this resistance to pride, that Jesus is going to strengthen him with humility instead. So actually, I went a little bit deeper, because this is just the way I read the Bible. So I was thinking, and I feel like this, I would say this is the Holy Spirit kind of leading me in these thoughts, but I was sitting there, and one of the things that's always stood out to me is the connection, like, when I hear, so Paul's name was originally Saul, and he's from the tribe of Benjamin. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Because King Saul was also from the tribe of Benjamin, but like, that's all that I knew as far as like any connection there. So I looked up I don't know why I did this, but this is what I did. I was like, what is the name? Because names mean a lot in the Bible and they tell us a lot. And so if we look at the name, Saul and Paul, it tells us a lot here. So Saul means prayed for. It's like the desired one, the like we were waiting on you kind of a thing. But Paul means small, little, or humble. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And this stood out to me because I've always thought it was interesting, like I said, about Saul, King Saul, and Paul, and Benjamin, and all that. So I think there's a lesson here, and I hope you can follow my train of thought here because it's really neat. So Saul was the first king of Israel from the tribe of Benjamin. Paul was also named Saul. He was also from the tribe of Benjamin. Paul was a Pharisee. And what do we know about Pharisees? They're very legalistic, but they also thought they were better than everybody else, right? Jesus said, like, I'm not here for I'm here for the sick, not for those who don't even like know they're sick. That's the Pharisees, right? They just think they don't need any help. They are good. They have it all figured out. And they think they're better than everyone else because they knew the law. They followed it more, quote unquote, than others. So they were very prideful in the way they acted. And this is why I think the thorn in the flesh is pride. Because if we look at King Saul in the Old Testament, he is he's a contrast with David as well. But King Saul, at first, he was humble. Like, he didn't even want to be anointed. He was like hiding behind some crates whenever Samuel tried to say, hey, here's your king. And King Saul was exalted in his own eyes. He became very prideful. And when he decided to disobey God and not follow his orders to, in a battle, then God removed him from that position, and it was his downfall. It was, and so Paul would have known about this story and the lessons and all of that. And so Saul was removed from his position of authority of a king due to his pride. So then I think if we look at Paul, right? Well, he was Saul at the time. On the road to Damascus, that is when his name changed from Saul to Paul. And what happened on the road? He was humbled by being blinded 3 days and needing to ask help of the very ones that he was determined to persecute in the first place. So I think that God used this thorn in the flesh to keep Paul humble so he wouldn't face that same fate. Also, him saying his name is Paul over and over, he knows what that means. Like, we're like, oh, what's his name mean? But they knew what names meant. Paul meant humble or little, small. Like, it was a constant reminder of where he needed to put himself. He wanted, and you see this all through his letters, but he wanted to be a servant of Christ. So he needed to be willing to receive that thorn in the flesh to keep him humble. And that's what we see there in 2 Corinthians, his realization, because Jesus made it clear to him that this is to keep you humble so that I am strengthened in this weakness. And so whatever God wanted to teach him, he's willing to take it. And this is why he says things like in Romans 8:28, that God works all things out for the good of those who love him. Paul knew that every single thing that happened was for good. And good does not mean that it's going to always feel good or that it's going to be fun or that it's going to be the way we want. Our good as Christians is to be humbled, to keep us safe from pride, to keep us safe from greed, etc. So there may be something in your life that is very challenging for you. This is something that personally, when I was listening to this, I was thinking about this. If you have a child, for example, because one of the things this is a little bit of a tangent, but I just want to say it because it applies to a lot of people. If you have a child with some kind of maybe special needs or some kind of issue, then we can ask, like, why would God allow that to happen? But this reframes it for me to say, God is doing something, right? That it's not that he caused it, but just like in Genesis 50, when Joseph says, what you meant for evil, God used for good. It's like there's effects of sin in the world and choices and all of that stuff, but God will use things in our lives to teach us something. So my son has a lot of like behavioral issues, and he's just kind of the opposite of me in a lot of ways. And that is teaching me, though, how to have patience, how to have grace, how to not care what other people think, because I am very to myself. Like when I'm out in public, I don't make a big scene. My son is like, I'm here, it's ready to go. Like he is like very extroverted. I'm introverted, all these things. And it's like God is doing things through that for my character, right? So in your life, there could be things, either it could be mental, meaning your own. Maybe you struggle with something. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's greed. Maybe it's, I don't know. Or it's something circumstantial outside of you. But instead of looking at it and thinking like, why is this happening in a negative way, look at it as this positive way. Because in business, as you're trying to follow this calling that God has given you, there is something that is always going to be a challenge. And it may be that, like I think about this for myself, like if I had quit my job and immediately had massive success in an online business, that would have not been good. God will always come after us, but one of the reasons I turned back to God so strongly is because of how hard it was. If it hadn't been like that, the mindset journey I've been on, the heart journey, my faith, all of that has been a direct, what's the word? A result, direct result of me leaving my job and it being so challenging caused me to say, what is all of this stuff? Like, what am I thinking? If I had been successful immediately, I don't think that I would have done that. I think that I would have been like, look at how awesome I am. Look at how much money I have. Like, who knows? And so there's always something that's happening that we have to, instead of like beating ourselves up, like, why can't I be successful? Why can't I do this? And I think it's good to go through the mindset stuff and work through it and get with God and say, what's going on? But it's a journey. And that's what I want you guys to understand, that God loves you enough to not let you go the easy route, to keep you humble, that if you're going to do his work, then he wants to protect you from the spiritual attacks. He wants you to protect you from the flesh, from yourself. So in this way, we should reframe any hardships to challenge as something potentially from God. So if there's something happening in your life, it could be that you are sinning, you are doing something you're not supposed to be doing, you are having a spiritual attack, like whatever. It could be a number of things. There's a bad choice that you made. But if you've taken all that to God and you stop doing the thing, you know you're okay, you prayed against the spiritual attacks, all of that, yet this thing remains. Like Paul said, he prayed 3 times for God to remove the thorn in the flesh. If it remains, then it could be that God is trying to work through you. And God made it clear to Paul that it wasn't something he's going to be able to pray away, that this is actually something for his good. And so that's when Paul's attitude about it changed. Like this is here for your good. So I do want to say, and I said this already, but I just want to reiterate, this isn't the same as you working through and trying to get your thoughts right. Like, a lot of times we are going through business and we're trying to step into our calling and we have a lot of imposter syndrome. We have a lot of money mindset issues, etc. That could be why you're not being successful. And that's still worth, like, you definitely have to work through that, work through your thinking. Is there any sin, etc., etc. But this is more like once you've done that, yet this thing continues to be something that you struggle with, that area. And often it's something that might surprise you. So I would actually think that Paul was probably surprised that this thing was happening over and over, because in a lot of other areas he was doing so well, right? So it's like, why is this the thing that I keep struggling with, that I cannot seem to shake? And I think that's very telling, right? So you find yourself saying, like, how could I struggle with this because I am XYZ? Meaning, like, Paul probably, it's like, how could I, and this is so prideful to even say this, right? But how could I struggle with pride when I know that pride is a sin? Like, I'm a Pharisee, or I was a Pharisee, like, if you find yourself saying something like that, like one of the things that I've said is like, how could I have gotten a PhD in cancer biology and done all this stuff and then struggle to be a stay-at-home mom, to struggle to manage a child? How could I struggle with this business? I've never struggled with something like this at all. Like, what is going on? So the other thing you might find yourself saying is like, I shouldn't feel this way because of XYZ? Or what will people say when they find out that I struggle with XYZ? So to kind of figure out what this might be, I want you to ask yourself, what do you continue to struggle with? Now, again, you have to do your own journey here and get really clear with yourself. And this is where I can help you with coaching to walk through this, to figure out and to parse out, is this something that you've been working on? Is it something that you need to work on? Are there things that you need to change in your life? Or is this something that God is trying to get your attention and he's showing you, this is my grace is sufficient? And is that the message he's wanting to give you? So instead of shaming yourself for that struggle, think like Paul thought, boast in that weakness, because this is where the power of Christ is strengthened. You are strong when you are weak. It doesn't mean that you're not really called to start a business or that you aren't cut out for this or whatever. Like maybe God is using this challenge. And again, it can be either mental or circumstantial to continue to develop your faith, keeping pride and greed at bay so that you can serve God in the way that your heart desires and help the people that God wants you to help. And, a way to look at this is a way that helps me kind of frame this is to say, maybe one day you're going to have a lot of wealth and abundance. And that's because God is going to he's going to give to those in need in a really big way through you. And that reflects God's heart. Like he cares for the needy, right? And anything he's put on your heart to support, any causes, anything like that. But if that kind of money would ruin your marriage or ruin your relationship with God, and you would turn to the money instead of to God, or you're going to get entrapped in greed or whatever it is, then in his mercy and wisdom, God may keep you from that success, right? Keep you, like that's the journey, right? Preparing you for that one day. But it's like he's allowing you to go through those hard things between here and there because you're not ready, right? You have to become ready. And at the end of the day, you should want to be like, how do I say that? You should want to be humble, to continue to have your eyes focused on him so that like more than money or success or anything else, if those things are going to get in the way of that, then we don't want them, right? Because what's the point if our business is not to serve God and to serve others for him? I hope that made sense. I hope that you can follow my train of thought there. I thought it was really important to talk about because, like I said, there are so many people that have the belief, and it's a false belief, that if I'm called to this, then it should be easy. But that's not always the case. And I hope that this makes sense for how God can be using that. And I didn't put this on here, but I should say that this means then that as you're going through your business, you should always anticipate there's going to be a struggle. And I know we don't like to hear that. Like we don't, but really in our whole lives, I mean, not just in our business, but anything we're doing, like there's going to be something that we are always struggling with because it's our own thorn in the flesh situation, right? There's something in our lives that we need that thorn in the flesh in order to remain humble. And so God will use that. So I think that really shifts things because a lot of people, I mean, I'm guilty of this, and I think it's an American United States problem where we really don't like hard things. We will work hard, but we really don't like when things aren't going well, when there's a challenge, when there's opposition, when there's whatever, or if we're not excellent at everything we do, that when we start this business, if everything doesn't immediately work out, or we feel like God's calling us to write a book and we don't really know how to write and we might have to go learn how to write. And maybe you're not a great writer, but he still called you, right? That's the keeping you humble part is that it may not be something that you are excellent at. And that we have to go into this knowing and expecting that God, because he loves us and because Christ is going to show through us, we should expect that in some way in our lives, there's going to be a weakness, a challenge that God's probably going to work through that even bigger than you can imagine. So I hope that makes sense. Again, if you want to do a coaching call or book a discovery call to talk about how to work together further, you can find those links in the description below. And that is it for this episode. And until next time, keep pursuing your calling. Thanks for listening to the Mama with a Calling podcast. As always, you'll find the show notes for today's episode at mamawithacalling.com/podcast. Really quick before you head out, are you loving these episodes? To make sure this podcast gets in the ears of as many mamas as possible, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. I'm going to be reading your reviews on the podcast, so I can't wait to hear from you. Also, if you know someone that needs to hear these episodes, grab a screenshot and share it on Instagram, and don't forget to tag me at Mama with a Calling so I can share it in my stories. Until next time, keep pursuing your calling.